Can I be honest with you? Most people walk past genius every single day. They tip it $2, they hand it their luggage, they don't even look it in the eye, and then they wonder why the world feels so broken. This is the story of a man who carried 8 languages inside him, like hidden rooms in a house nobody ever bothered to enter. And the woman who almost destroyed him for daring to open the door. Get out of the way. Vivienne Ashcroft didn't even look up from her phone. She just flicked her wrist toward the service corridor like she was brushing dust off her sleeve. "Ma'am, the agent from Beijing is asking for—" I said, "Move. You smell like the kitchen. Do you want the guests to smell the kitchen?" Ezekiel Parnell stepped back, quiet, hands at his sides, jaw set but soft. He'd learned a long time ago that reacting was a luxury he couldn't afford. Ma'am. They're speaking Mandarin and their interpreter hasn't arrived. I can. You can. What? She finally looked at him. Eyes scanning his uniform, his scuffed shoes, the faded name badge clipped crooked to his vest. She almost laughed. You're a bellhop. Go carry something. What she didn't know, what nobody in that building knew, was that Mandarin wasn't even his strongest language. Here's what you need to understand about that morning. The Sterling Grand Hotel sat on Fifth Avenue like a monument to money. 42 floors of Italian marble, hand-stitched curtains, and rooms that cost more per night than most people earned in a month. And on this particular Tuesday in October, the hotel was hosting something it had never hosted before. A private meeting between Guo Xiaoming, the founder of China's second-largest tech conglomerate, and a consortium of European investors looking to close a $740 million semiconductor partnership. The meeting was set for the ambassador's suite on the 38th floor. Translators had been booked 8 weeks in advance. Security had been briefed. The menu had been curated by 3 different chefs to accommodate dietary restrictions across 4 cultures. Everything was perfect, until it wasn't. The lead Mandarin interpreter, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen from Columbia University's translation department, had called in at 6:47 that morning. Family emergency. Her backup was in Washington. The backup's backup had food poisoning. 3 translators deep, and the Sterling Grand had nobody. Nobody except a bellhop who'd been invisible to everyone in that building for 9 years. Ezekiel Parnell, 34 years old, 6'1", dark skin, close-cropped hair going gray, at the temples 10 years too early, broad shoulders from years of lifting luggage that rich people packed like they were moving countries. He had a scar on his left hand from a kitchen accident his second week on the job, and he wore the same pair of black shoes every day, resoled twice because he couldn't afford new ones. 9 years at the Sterling Grand. 9 years of "excuse me." "Right away, sir. Let me get that for you." 9 years of holding doors and pressing elevator buttons and standing perfectly still while people talked about him like he was furniture. And in all 9 years, not one person had ever asked him a question that mattered. Vivienne Ashcroft, general manager of the Sterling Grand, 46 years old, blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt, stood in the lobby making phone calls that weren't working. Every translation agency in Manhattan was either booked or couldn't provide Mandarin English business interpreting on 2 hours' notice. The meeting was at 10. It was now 8:15. $740 million. 4 delegations. No interpreter. And Vivienne Ashcroft, the woman who had once told a maid she could be replaced by a Roomba, was starting to sweat through her Chanel blazer. That's when the concierge, Marco Benedetti, walked over and said something that changed the trajectory of every person in this story. "Have you talked to Zeke?" Vivienne blinked. "Who?" "Zeke. The bellhop. Ezekiel Parnell. He speaks Mandarin. I've heard him on the phone during his breaks." Vivienne stared at Marco like he'd suggested she hire the building's fire escape. "The bellhop," she said flatly. "You want me to put the bellhop in a room with Guo Xiaoming?" Marco didn't flinch. "I've worked with him for 9 years, Vivienne. The man speaks at least 6 or 7 languages. Maybe more. I've heard Mandarin, French, Arabic, Portuguese." She cut him off. "I don't care if he speaks Dolphin. He's not going in that room. Find me a real translator." She turned away. Conversation over. But the clock kept ticking, and at 9:22 a.m., with 38 minutes until the most important meeting in the Sterling Grand's history, Vivian Ashcroft had exactly 0 options left. She found Ezekiel in the luggage storage room, organizing tags. She didn't knock. She didn't introduce herself, even though they'd never actually spoken beyond her barking orders in hallways. She just pointed at him and said, "Can you actually speak Chinese, or is Marco losing his mind?" "Mandarin, ma'am." And yes, she stepped closer. Her perfume was expensive. Her expression was not. Listen to me very carefully. You walk in there, you say what I tell you to say. You do not think. You do not add. You do not improvise. You are a mouth. That's it. If you embarrass this hotel, if you cost us this deal, I will personally make sure you never work in hospitality in this city again. Do you understand me? Yes, ma'am. She looked at his shoes, his name badge, the small stain on his vest from a coffee he'd carried for a guest that morning. "God help us," she muttered and walked out. Ezekiel stood alone in the luggage room, quiet. Still, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small black notebook, soft cover, pages yellowed, held together with a rubber band that had been replaced so many times the cover had grooves where each band had sat. He opened it to the Mandarin section. 12 pages of handwritten characters, grammar notes, idioms, business phrases, cultural protocols, all in pencil, all in his handwriting. He closed it, slipped it back into his pocket, and followed her to the 38th floor. The ambassador suite had floor-to-ceiling windows facing Central Park. October light came through gold and heavy. 4 Chinese executives sat on one side of a mahogany table that probably cost more than Ezekiel's apartment. Guo Xiaoming sat at the center, 61 years old, silver hair, reading glasses perched on his nose, the kind of stillness that comes from decades of being the most powerful person in every room he enters. He looked up when the door opened. He saw Vivienne. Then, he saw Ezekiel. His eyes paused just briefly on the Bellhop uniform, the name badge, the scuffed shoes. Then he looked away, not with malice, with disinterest. The way you look at a wall. Vivienne made no introduction. She gestured at the Chinese delegation and said one word to Ezekiel. "Go." Ezekiel took one breath. Then he spoke, not the Mandarin you learn from apps, not the choppy, tonal mess that most Westerners produce when they try. He spoke in formal Mandarin, the register used in Chinese boardrooms, layered with the specific politeness structures that signal respect for hierarchy. He opened with an apology for the delay, framed it as a mark of how seriously the Sterling Grand valued this partnership, and delivered it with the kind of fluency that made the air in the room shift. Guo Xiaoming took off his reading glasses, slowly. He leaned forward and responded in rapid Mandarin, dense, technical, fast. Testing. The way a master tests a student who's walked in uninvited and claimed to belong. Ezekiel matched him, sentence for sentence. When the conversation turned technical, when semiconductor supply chain terminology surfaced, Ezekiel didn't stumble. He translated concepts between English and Mandarin with the precision of someone who understood not just the words but the architecture beneath them. When Vivian made a demand, blunt American, "We need commitment by end of quarter," Ezekiel reshaped it. In Chinese business culture, directness like that reads as disrespect. So he softened it, turned it into an invitation, framed it as a shared opportunity rather than an ultimatum. And when Guo Xiaoming gave a long, winding response full of careful qualifications, the kind of answer Americans hear as a no, Ezekiel leaned toward Vivienne and said quietly, "He's not refusing, ma'am. He's telling you this needs to go through his board." In Chinese business, that's a strong, positive signal. It means he wants to say yes, but needs to build consensus first. Vivian looked at him, really looked at him. 9 years, and this was the first time she'd actually seen his face. Not his uniform, not his badge, his face. The meet lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, Guo Xiaoming stood, walked around the table, and shook Ezekiel's hand with both of his. Then he spoke to him quietly in Mandarin, just between the two of them. What he said translated loosely, "Your gift is being wasted in this building. I hope the people above you learn to see what is in front of them." He said the people above you, but his eyes moved to Vivienne. The delegation didn't pull out. $740 million stayed on the table. And Vivian Ashcroft stood in the hallway afterward, looked at Ezekiel and said, "Fine, not terrible. But next time, just translate. Don't interpret. I don't need you to think. I need you to talk." She walked away. Click, click, click on marble. No pause, no thank you. She didn't use his name. Ezekiel walked back to the luggage room, sat on a crate, and opened the black notebook to the first page. A child's handwriting, pencil, faded. Bonjour. Thank you. In Haitian Creole. He was 7 years old when he wrote those words. To understand what Ezekiel Parnell carried in that notebook, you have to go back 27 years, to a one-bedroom apartment in Flatbush, Brooklyn. Ezekiel was 7, skinny, quiet, the kind of kid who watched everything and said almost nothing. His mother, Clarice Parnell, had come from Port-au-Prince 11 years earlier with 2 dresses, $40, and a French Creole dictionary she'd stolen from a church library because she believed words were the only currency that never devalued. She worked 2 jobs, days at a laundromat on Nostrand Avenue, nights cleaning offices in Midtown. Her hands were always cracked. She always smelled like bleach and lavender, the lavender from a lotion she bought once a month, because, she said, even poor women deserve to smell like something beautiful. One night she came home and set something on the kitchen table. A Mandarin's English phrase book, water-damaged, found in the recycling bin of one of the offices she cleaned. "Somebody threw this away," she said. "I don't know what language this is. But it's a language, and every language is a door, Zeke. You collect enough doors, nobody can ever lock you in." He opened that book at the kitchen table under a light that buzzed like a trapped fly. And in his small, careful handwriting, he copied his first Mandarin characters into the black notebook. He was 7 years old. That notebook never left his side. Flatbush in the 90s was a world in 20 square blocks. The Dominican family next door spoke Spanish with a speed that sounded like music. The Senegalese tailor on Church Avenue spoke French and Wolof. The Egyptian man who ran the bodega spoke Arabic and taught Ezekiel numbers in exchange for Ezekiel sweeping the floor every Saturday. The old Haitian woman on the 4th floor taught him proper French, not Creole French, real Parisian French, because she'd been a school teacher in Jacmel before she came to America and nobody ever asked her to teach again. Every language Ezekiel learned came from a relationship, a kindness given, a kindness returned. No tutor, no classroom, no program. Just a quiet kid who listened and a neighborhood that talked. 8 languages by the age of 30. Mandarin, French, Arabic, Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, Haitian Creole, and English. And not a single person at the Sterling Grand had ever thought to ask. Every morning, his 5-year-old daughter Amara asked him the same question. "Daddy, do you carry bags forever?" And every morning he gave her the same answer. "I carry whatever gets us to tomorrow, baby." 8 languages, 0 people who knew. 3 days later, someone came looking for Ezekiel. Not to hand him a luggage cart. Not to tell him which floor needed towels. Someone came to talk to him. Nathan Cross, the Sterling Grand Director of International Guest Relations, 39, tall, calm, the only executive in the building who knew everyone's name including the dishwashers, walked down to the basement storage room during Ezekiel's lunch break. He found him sitting on a milk crate eating rice and beans from a thermos his mother had packed. Most executives would have sent a text, would have had someone summon Ezekiel to an office upstairs. Nathan didn't do that. He walked down. He extended his hand. "Mr. Parnell," Ezekiel stared. 9 years. Nobody had ever called him that. Not Ezekiel, not Zeke, not Bellhop, not Hey. "Mr. Parnell, I heard what happened in the ambassador suite," Nathan said. 70 minutes of live Mandarin interpretation with no preparation, no notes, and from what I understand, you didn't just translate. You read the room better than anyone on our events team has in years. "I just helped out, sir." "How many languages do you speak, Mr. Parnell?" Silence. A long one. Ezekiel had learned a long time ago that revealing too much to the wrong person was dangerous. People don't like it when the bellhop turns out to be more than they decided he was. It makes them uncomfortable. Uncomfortable people find reasons to push you back down. But something about Nathan Cross felt different. The man had come downstairs. He'd used his name. 8, sir. Nathan didn't gasp, didn't widen his eyes, just nodded slowly, like a man who'd been looking for something and finally found it. We have a Japanese pharmaceutical delegation arriving Thursday. Private dinner, 8 guests, their CEO doesn't speak English, and our usual Japanese interpreter just canceled on another event this week. I don't trust last-minute agencies for something this sensitive. Would you be willing to sit in? That night, Ezekiel called his mother from the parking lot of his apartment building. Mama, they want me to interpret at a real dinner. Japanese delegation. A man named Nathan actually came down to the basement to ask me. Clarice was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You've been ready since you were 7 years old, baby. The only thing that changed is somebody finally opened the door." He hung up, opened the black notebook to the Japanese section. Pages of handwritten hiragana, katakana, kanji, grammar trees, verb conjugation tables, kigo, the ultra-formal register used in Japanese business. All in pencil, all self-taught. Years of quiet work that nobody had ever seen. But not everyone at the Sterling Grand wanted to see Ezekiel Parnell rise. Gerald Hoffman, the hotel's head of corporate events, walked into Vivian's office the next morning. "Vivian," he said, "Nathan is putting the Bellhop in front of a Japanese pharmaceutical CEO. If this goes sideways, it's a PR disaster. We'll look like we can't afford real staff." Vivian leaned back. "Let him. If the Bellhop embarrasses himself, that's Nathan's problem. At least we're not paying interpreter fees." They laughed together about Ezekiel the way people laugh about something they've already decided doesn't matter. Thursday arrived. Word had already spread. By Wednesday afternoon, everyone at the Sterling Grand knew. The Bellhop, the luggage guy, was going to interpret for a Japanese pharmaceutical CEO. A man with no degree, no credentials, no title. The reactions came fast. A junior event coordinator smirked over her latte. "What's next?" "The dishwasher runs our wine program." A floor manager on the 20th raised an eyebrow. "Is this some kind of diversity stunt?" 2 housekeepers exchanged a look in the hallway. They didn't need to say it. The look said everything. Nobody asked whether Ezekiel was qualified. Nobody asked how many languages he spoke or how he learned them. They just decided. Thursday evening, 5:45 p.m. Ezekiel arrived early. He always arrived early. But tonight felt different. He walked through the lobby in his bellhop uniform, black vest, white shirt, same scuffed shoes. Because nobody had told him to wear anything different. He didn't own a suit. He pressed the elevator button for the 38th floor. The doors opened. A woman in a silk dress was already inside. She smiled, the automatic polite kind. Then she noticed which floor he'd pressed, the executive floor. The smile vanished. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The elevator opened. Ezekiel stepped out, and then a voice. "Zeke." Marco Benedetti was standing by the hallway window. He was holding a garment bag. He looked at Ezekiel's uniform, then at his face, and something in his expression softened. "My brother-in-law's," he said. "Close enough to your size." Ezekiel looked at the bag. "You don't need it," Marco said. "You could walk in there in a bathrobe and still be the smartest person at that table. But I don't want them to have a single reason not to listen." Ezekiel took the bag. Inside was a charcoal gray suit, simple, clean, pressed. He changed in the restroom at the end of the hall, stood in front of the mirror. For the first time in 9 years, the man looking back at him wasn't the bellhop, wasn't the luggage guy, wasn't the invisible man who stood by the door. He reached into his old vest, pulled out the black notebook, and placed it in the inside breast pocket of the borrowed suit, right over his heart. Clothes don't make the man, but sometimes they clear the road so the man can finally be seen. The private dining room had a single long table set with crystal and candles. Dr. Haruki Watanabe walked in first, CEO of one of Tokyo's most respected pharmaceutical firms. Behind him, 5 senior executives, all in dark suits, all carrying themselves with the kind of authority that doesn't need volume. They bowed. A full, deliberate bow. The Sterling Grand's events team nodded back stiffly, awkwardly. The cultural gap was already visible. Then Ezekiel stepped forward. He bowed. Not the shallow, rushed kind most Americans attempt. A precise bow, calibrated to the formality of the room, the hierarchy of the guests. Then he introduced himself in Japanese, not textbook Japanese. Kigo, the ultra-formal register so complex that even many native speakers struggle with it. Ezekiel spoke it like he'd grown up in it. Dr. Watanabe's eyes widened just slightly. He responded in rapid Japanese, testing, probing. The way a master tests someone who claims to understand the craft. Ezekiel didn't miss a beat. The dinner lasted 2.5 hours, and what Ezekiel did went beyond translation. When a sterling grand executive made a proposal too directly, Ezekiel softened it, reframed it in the indirect, consensus-building language that Japanese executives need before they can say yes. When Dr. Watanabe gave a carefully worded hesitation, the kind of answer Americans hear as rejection, Ezekiel explained quietly, he's not refusing. He's telling you this needs internal alignment. In Japanese business, that's respect, not resistance. Then came the moment. A highly technical pharmaceutical term surfaced, a specific regulatory concept related to cross-border clinical trials. The conversation hit a wall. Nobody on the hotel's events team understood it. Ezekiel paused for half a second. Then he explained the concept in both Japanese and English. He referenced an article from a Japanese medical journal he'd read 3 months earlier, on his phone, on a break, sitting on a milk crate in the basement. Dr. Watanabe stared at him. Then slowly, he smiled. The kind of smile that says, I don't know who you are, but I know exactly what you are. After the dinner, Nathan Cross leaned back in his chair and didn't say a word. Just looked at Ezekiel with the expression of a man watching something rare happen in real time. Vivian Ashcroft was watching too. Standing behind the glass partition of the private dining room entrance, she'd come to observe, maybe curiosity, maybe hoping to see him fail. Her face showed confusion, deep, uncomfortable confusion. The kind that happens when the person you dismissed turns out to be the most extraordinary one in the room, 2.5 hours. A pharmaceutical partnership worth $380 million, secured by a man in a borrowed suit. Nathan went to Vivienne the next morning. He didn't sit down. You saw what I saw in there, Nathan said. Vivienne turned toward the window. Manhattan stretched out below, cold, glittering, indifferent. He translated well. He didn't translate, Vivienne. He read the culture. He read intent. He caught a regulatory term that our entire events department couldn't explain and broke it down in 2 languages without notes. That's not translating. That's strategy. Vivian folded her arms. A wall going up. A parrot that can mimic doesn't mean it can think. Nathan let the words sit. Did you just compare him to a parrot? I'm saying speaking and strategic thinking are different skill sets. And I'm saying you watched a man do both simultaneously for 2.5 hours in a language he taught himself, in a suit he borrowed, with no preparation and no support from anyone except Marco and a garment bag. Silence. Nathan stepped closer. I want to create a position. Director of Multicultural Guest Relations. Someone who doesn't just speak languages but understands how different cultures communicate, negotiate, build trust. That's what Ezekiel does. That's what he's been doing his whole life. We just never asked. Vivienne exhaled. Gerald will fight it. Gerald's job is to manage optics. My job is to find the people who actually move the needle. Another silence, then, fine, do it. But if this blows up, it's your project, Nathan. Not mine, permission, not support. That afternoon, Nathan found Ezekiel in the basement, back in his bellhop vest, borrowed suit folded neatly in the garment bag. Nathan extended his hand. I'd like to offer you a position, Mr. Parnell. Not as a bellhop. Ezekiel looked at the hand. Then at his own, calloused from 9 years of suitcase handles and cart rails. He shook it. What would I be doing? Nathan smiled. The kind that's been waiting. What you've already been doing your whole life. Except now people will actually be listening. That evening, Ezekiel pulled up outside his mother's apartment in Flatbush. The streetlights were just coming on. Amara was at the kitchen table when he walked in. Same table. Same chair. Same buzzing light that had hummed above that kitchen since Ezekiel was a boy copying Mandarin characters in pencil. She looked up. Daddy, do you carry bags forever? Same question. Same little voice, same big eyes holding a worry no 5-year-old should carry. Except tonight, for the first time, Ezekiel gave a different answer. No, baby, I don't think so. Amara tilted her head. She didn't fully understand, but she felt it. Something in her father's voice had shifted. Like a window opening in a room that had been closed a long time, she smiled, small, certain. From the doorway, Clarice watched, arms folded, eyes wet. She didn't say a word. Later, after Amara fell asleep on the couch, with her coloring book still in her hand, Ezekiel and Clarice sat on the front stoop. The street was quiet. A car alarm went off somewhere distant and stopped. The October air smelled like someone's cooking and old rain. Your father would have been proud, Clarice said. She wasn't looking at Ezekiel. She was looking at the street, at something far away only she could see. He spoke 4 languages: Creole, French, English, Spanish. Never got to use any of them for anything except survival. I'm using them for both, Mama. She reached over and put her hand on top of his. Didn't squeeze. Just rested it there, warm and steady. They sat like that for a long time. They didn't need to say anything else. When Ezekiel went inside, he sat at the kitchen table and opened the black notebook to the very first page. Bonjour. Merci. His first 2 words, 27 years ago, at this exact table, under this exact light. Below those words, page after page after page, 8 languages branching outward like roots from a single seed. Every empire starts with 1 word. 3 weeks later, everything came to a head. The Sterling Grand's annual International Hospitality Gala. The grand ballroom, all 42 floors lit up, 300 guests from 22 countries. Diplomats, investors, tech founders, cultural attachés, people who collectively shaped economies from 6 continents. Vivienne Ashcroft was delivering the welcome address. This was her stage, the event that defined the Sterling Grand's brand on the global map. Ezekiel sat in the 4th row. Officially, he was now Director of Multicultural Guest Relations. He had a badge with his name on it, a suit of his own this time, bought with his first real paycheck. But the black notebook was still in his breast pocket, right where it always was. He should have been at the center of this event. 2 deals facilitated, 2 languages proven, 8 available. Instead, 4th row. Because Gerald Hoffman had gone to Vivienne 3 days before the gala. If the press finds out our new multicultural director was carrying suitcases 3 weeks ago, this becomes a sideshow. I've already booked a professional interpretation team. Stanford certified. Resumes you can actually put in a press kit. Vivienne had hesitated, but something in her still couldn't fully let go. Fine, she said. Stanford handles the main sessions. Ezekiel sits back up. The gala began smoothly. Presentations, champagne, polite laughter in 7 languages. The Stanford team stood at the edges of the ballroom, polished and professional, handling the opening sessions without a hitch. Then Ambassador Fatima al-Rashidi took the stage. Saudi Arabia's deputy cultural minister, a commanding woman with a voice that could fill a cathedral. She was presenting a $1.6 billion cultural exchange initiative between the Gulf states and 3 American cities. Her English was functional but imperfect, strong enough for a dinner conversation, not strong enough for the precision a room full of 300 international decision-makers demands. The Stanford interpreter stood ready. Ambassador al-Rashidi began. Numbers, projections, legal frameworks, dense, technical Arabic financial terminology where a single misplaced word changes the meaning of an entire clause. And that's exactly what happened. The Stanford interpreter, certified, credentialed, Stanford-trained, mistranslated a key term. A proposed cultural partnership became a binding financial obligation. An invitation became a demand. 1 word, 1 wrong word. And suddenly Ambassador al-Rashidi was telling a room full of 300 people that her government was committing to something it absolutely was not. A German diplomat raised his hand immediately. Ambassador, can you confirm this is a binding commitment? Because the framework document says otherwise. Fatima looked confused. She'd said the right thing in Arabic. She knew she had. But the English that reached was wrong. She turned to the interpreter. The interpreter froze, mouth open, eyes wide. The silence lasted 5 seconds. In a room like that, 5 seconds is a geological age. Murmurs started. Delegates shifted. A ripple of doubt cracked through the room like ice splitting. Vivian Ashcroft stood at the side of the stage. Her face went white. She looked at the Stanford interpreter, the one with the degree, the certification, the resume you could put in a press kit, standing frozen at the microphone. Then she looked at the fourth row, at Ezekiel. Their eyes met, and in that moment they both knew. Ezekiel didn't wait for permission. He stood. The room turned. Gerald Hoffman's jaw clenched. Ezekiel walked to the stage. Calm, steady. The way a man walks when he's been preparing for this moment his entire life without knowing it. He reached the podium, turned to Ambassador al-Rashidi, and in clear, fluent Arabic explained what had happened. Calmly, precisely, respectfully. Fatima's shoulders dropped. She nodded. She understood. Then Ezekiel turned to the room. He explained the mistranslation in English, identified the exact term, broke down the difference between a cultural partnership proposal and a binding financial commitment in Gulf state diplomatic frameworks, made it simple, made it clear, made it impossible to misunderstand. Then, without a pause, without a single note, he repeated the correction in Mandarin for the Chinese delegation, then in French for the West African and European contingents, then in Japanese for the delegation from Tokyo, then in Portuguese for the Brazilian investors, then in Spanish for the Latin American attaché. 6 languages. 90 seconds. No notes. The room went silent. Then Ambassador Fatima al-Rashidi started clapping, alone at first. Then the German diplomat. Then another. Then another. Then the entire room. 300 people on their feet. The sound hit the chandeliers and came back down like rain. Dr. Watanabe rose from the second row. He walked to Ezekiel, placed both hands on his shoulders, and spoke to him in Japanese. What he said translated, "Men like you are the bridges the world has forgotten it needs." Ezekiel answered in Japanese, and for the first time, the very first time, his voice cracked. Just barely. Just enough. And Vivian Ashcroft stood at the side of the stage, perfectly still. This was the woman who had said you smell like the kitchen. The woman who had said, "You're a bellhop, go carry something." The woman who had called him a mouth, a parrot, backup. The woman who had chosen Stanford over the man who had already saved her twice. Now she was watching that man stand in front of 22 nations and do what nobody else in the building could do, while the team she'd chosen instead stood frozen and useless beside him. Vivian Ashcroft opened her mouth. Nothing came out, not because she chose silence, because for the first time in her career, she had absolutely nothing left to say. Then she did something nobody expected. She walked to the podium, stepped into the light, 300 people watching, every camera in the room. Her hands were shaking. She gripped the edges of the podium to hide it, but her voice betrayed her. For the first time in 20 years of running 5-star properties and commanding rooms full of powerful people, Vivian Ashcroft's voice trembled. 3 weeks ago, she began. This man was carrying luggage in our lobby. The room went still. He came to me and said he could help with a translation crisis. He said he spoke Mandarin. He said he could save a meeting that was falling apart. She paused, swallowed. And I looked at him, at his uniform, at his shoes, and I told him to get out of the way because he smelled like the kitchen. A murmur passed through the audience. He helped anyway. He walked into that room and saved a $740 million deal that my entire team couldn't save. And when it was over, when he had single-handedly kept this hotel's most important partnership alive, do you know what I said to him? She stopped, closed her eyes for half a second. I said, "Not terrible, don't think. I didn't say thank you. I didn't even use his name." Silence. The kind that presses against your chest. His name is Ezekiel Parnell. He speaks 8 languages. He taught himself every single one. And he just saved this gala the same way he saved our hotel 3 weeks ago, while I still couldn't be bothered to see him as anything more than a uniform. She turned to face him. I was wrong, and I am sorry. The room erupted. Not the polite, restrained applause of a corporate gala, a real, full, thundering ovation that shook the chandeliers of the Sterling Grand. Ezekiel stood at the podium. He didn't move. He didn't wave. He just stood there, holding his black notebook against his chest, and let the sound wash over him like something he'd been waiting to hear his entire life. After the gala, the ballroom emptied slowly. People who'd never looked at Ezekiel before suddenly wanted to know his name. Ambassador al-Rashidi found him near the exit. She spoke to him in Arabic, a deliberate choice, a gesture of respect between equals. She offered him a consulting position with her ministry's cultural exchange program. 6-figure salary. Full relocation support to Washington. Ezekiel asked in Arabic if he could think about it. She smiled. The fact that you're asking me in perfect Arabic tells me you already know your worth. I hope the people around you learn it too. Gerald Hoffman resigned 4 days after the gala. No confrontation, no scene. He simply turned in his badge and walked out. The way people leave when staying would mean facing every single day the living proof of how wrong they were. What followed was a cascade. The New York Times ran a feature, The Bellhop Who Spoke 8 Languages. Viral in 72 hours. A TED Talk invitation. The State Department called. A linguistics professor at NYU left a voicemail. Mr. Parnell, I've been teaching language acquisition for 25 years. I'd like to understand how you did it. But none of it, compared to what happened at a kitchen table in Flatbush, Brooklyn. Clarice Parnell sat under the same buzzing light, reading glasses at the tip of her nose, the New York Times open in front of her. She read the line that said, Ezekiel Parnell credits his mother, Clarice, a Haitian immigrant who worked 2 jobs, for starting his education with a water-damaged Mandarin phrasebook she pulled from a recycling bin. She put the paper down, looked at the empty chair across from her, the same chair where a 7-year-old boy once opened a phrasebook like it was made of gold. From somewhere deep in her memory, a melody surfaced, a Creole lullaby she used to hum while washing dishes. She hummed it now, softly, without realizing. She didn't say a word, she just cried. Quietly, proudly. Ezekiel Parnell stood in front of a mirror, not in a basement, not in a luggage storage room, in an office, his office, 38th floor. The same floor where a woman in a silk dress had stopped smiling when she saw which button he pressed. The same floor where the air smelled like fresh flowers, and a world that had never made room for him until now. He adjusted his tie, straightened his collar, his jacket, bought with his first real paycheck, not borrowed, his. Behind him, through floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan stretched out in late afternoon light. The same city that had looked past him for 34 years was now spread beneath him like it had been waiting all along. The black notebook sat on his desk, open to the first page. Pencil, faded, bonjour, messy, 27 years. 2 words, and everything that grew from them. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother's phone, but the words were Amara's. Clarice had typed them out exactly as the little girl dictated, misspellings and all. Daddy, do you still carry bags? He smiled. That starts slow and doesn't stop. He typed back, I carry ideas now, baby. He put the phone down, looked out the window, took a long, quiet breath. Somewhere in Flatbush, a 5-year-old girl read that message out loud to her grandmother, and Clarice Parnell, standing at the kitchen sink, hands still damp, the same hands that had pulled a water-damaged phrasebook from a recycling bin 27 years ago, closed her eyes and whispered something in Creole that only she and God could hear. Here's something most people don't know. There are over 66 million multilingual adults living in the United States right now. 66 million people who speak 2, 3, sometimes 5 or 6 languages fluently, working jobs that never once ask them what they know. Fewer than 20% of American companies have any system to identify hidden skills in their own workforce. That means 8 out of 10 businesses could have an Ezekiel Parnell in their lobby, their kitchen, their loading dock, and they would never know. Because nobody ever thought to ask. The talent is already there. It's always been there. The only question is whether we're willing to see it. So here's what I want you to do, not tomorrow, not next week, today. Think of one person you see regularly but have never really spoken to. Your barista, your doorman. The security guard who nods at you every morning. The woman who vacuums your office after everyone goes home. Ask them one real question. Not how are you? Everyone says that and nobody means it. Ask something real. Something that tells another human being, I see you. You exist. You might be carrying something extraordinary inside you, and I want to know what it is. You could be standing next to the most remarkable person you've ever met and never know it, simply because you never opened your mouth and asked. And if you run a company, if you have any power at all over who gets seen and who stays invisible, here's your challenge. Look at your people. Not their resumes, not their degrees, their actual, living, breathing skills. Build a system where someone can tell you what they know, not just what their job title says they do. Ezekiel Parnell didn't need a degree. He didn't need a credential. He needed a door. Just one door. Be the door. If this story moved you, leave a comment. Tell me about a time you were overlooked, or a time you overlooked someone else. Share this with somebody who needs to hear it today. And subscribe, because stories like this aren't rare. We're just not telling them enough. 8 words. Take them wherever you go. Genius doesn't need a title. It needs a witness. Can I be honest with you for a second? You don't need anyone's permission to grow. You don't need a fancy school. You don't need money. You don't need somebody important to tap you on the shoulder and say, okay, now you're allowed to be extraordinary. You just start with whatever you have, wherever you are, and the world might not notice for a long time. Maybe years, maybe decades. That doesn't mean you stop. You keep going because you're not doing it for them. You're doing it for the day when the moment arrives, and it always arrives, and you are ready. Not kind of ready, fully ready. Because you never stopped. People will always try to put you in a box. You're the bellhop, you're the janitor. You're just this, you're just that. Let them think whatever they want. Because a box only holds you if you believe you belong in it. And you don't. So whatever you're building right now, keep building. The world doesn't owe you a stage. But when you build long enough, the stage finds you. Like, share, and subscribe. Every week, real stories, real justice. And remember, genius doesn't need a title. It needs time. Give yourself that time.